Esther chapter 2. I'm sure you probably remember everything that happened in chapter 1, but it has been a couple weeks. So just by way of reminder, we have King Ahasuerus, again, who is historically what you would, if you read of King Xerxes, this is the man. King Ahasuerus, his wife, Queen Vashti. He was throwing this, you could say, drunken party, and decides to have her come out and show herself in some degree. The Bible doesn't say, but show herself in some degree to the men that are with him. She refuses. His counselors say, we can't have that, or there's going to be rebellion by wives all over the kingdom. So he puts her away, and really that kind of is all that happens in chapter 1. And one thing that you're going to notice, we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that the author here, he's never putting the horse before the cart. He's really laying foundations, and he's just giving incremental information as we go here. And so chapter 2, and we're not going to look at the whole chapter tonight. We're going to stop in verse 18. The rest of the chapter, I think, really would go better with chapter 3 next week. But Esther chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "And after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. And then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, under the custody of Haggai the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. And let the maiden which pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the king pleased with the thing, and the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. And the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and the decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house, to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. And he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given to her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids to the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did, and what should become of her. Now, when every maid's turn was come to go into the king Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of women, for so were the days of the purifications, accomplished to it 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king, whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Sheashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubine. She came into the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. Now in the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go unto the king. She required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. And so Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is in the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head, and he made her queen instead of Vashti. And then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast, and he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. All right, we have several things to get through here. So in verse 1, it starts by saying, after these things. Now, contrary to what you might think, this is not a quick turn of events. From chapter 1 to chapter 2, there's actually been 4 years past. And so in chapter 1, all these things were taking place in Ahasuerus' 3rd year of his reign. This chapter, as we just read, in the 7th year of his reign. And so there's been 4 years take place. Now, what was taking place historically during those 4 years is that Ahasuerus and Persia were planning for and eventually were defeated in a battle against the Greeks. And so a lot of planning went in, and in fact, they had a far greater army, they had a bigger army, they had greater numbers, and yet they were defeated. And so Ahasuerus, he comes back, he's, as any king would be, he's mad, he's angry, and now he's starting to think about Vashti. And he's starting to think about this hasty decision that he had made based upon the advice of his counselors to put her away. He becomes, interestingly, an example of what we read in Proverbs 21, which says, the thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteousness. And then it says this, but of everyone that is hasty, only to want. And so whereas, Ahasuerus is not by any means what we might call a heroic example or a biblical example of anything good, he does become a biblical example of the need and the well desire of the person who is patient, who doesn't just rush into things head first without thinking. The reckless individual is not a hero. And Ahasuerus here becomes a great, I think, example of that. He's regretting what he had done. He's had time to think about this. All right. And in the moment, he was, again, drunk. And then he had all these other men telling him, hey, you can't have this. Not only did she disrespect you, but now all the wives of the kingdom are going to disrespect their husbands. And this is going to get out of control. She has put a blight upon your house. You just got to put her away. And in his haste and in his drunkenness, he goes along with it. He didn't learn from that. In this instance, he also turns to his advisors. He doesn't sit down and think through what he should do. He turns to his advisors. And again, they do up with this idea. And essentially, it's to play to his ego, right? We're going to have a beauty contest. That's essentially what they say. We're going to have a beauty contest. We're going to get all the most beautiful young virgins in the land. We're going to bring them to you. You can choose who's going to be the new queen. And, we don't have to read it, but the text tells us, and the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Well, of course it pleased the king, right? This isn't shocking news that this pagan king was pleased by this particular plan. This is not a shock to anybody. And so all this is taking place, and then we get this little snippet. Now Mordecai doesn't play heavily into this chapter, or at least not what we're going to be looking at tonight. We will be seeing a lot more about Mordecai in the next week, but we're introduced to him here. And so behind the scenes, there was in the palace this man named Mordecai. And so Mordecai, we just learned a little bit about him. He is Esther's cousin. Now Esther's parents, we're not told how they died, but we're told that they died. And Mordecai raised her. He raised her as his own daughter, in fact, is what the text tells us. But verse 5, and I think this is key for something I'll come back to a little bit later. Verse 5 says, now in Shushan the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. It doesn't say that he lived near the palace. It says he was in the palace. So we don't know exactly what he was doing. We don't know what his occupation was. But he was doing something that allowed him, at the least, to be in the presence of the palace, to be around the advisors, to be around people who had access to the king. Again, this is important for something here coming up in a minute. But Mordecai, he has raised Esther. And so here, Esther is described for us as fair and beautiful. And I find it very interesting, and I didn't put anything in the lesson about this, but I find it very interesting. A couple of comments are made about the absolute beauty of Esther and why I think that's important. Not only does it obviously play into the story, but God created Esther to be beautiful. He created Esther and used the physical qualities of how he created her to bring about his will. And so in an interesting turn of events, I think, Esther becomes an example for us of the fact that God doesn't just create you with the soul he wants you to have. God creates you with the very body he wants you to have. He creates you as he wants you to be. And Esther's beauty, right? That's not something that we often think of, God using a person's beauty to bring about his will. Well, he does with Esther. And so he uses her physical attributes as a means, not the only, but as a means to bring about the will of God. And he does so in such a dramatic way here in the story of Esther. And so this is just another in a long line of examples of reasons why it's important that we speak against this damnable doctrine that exists today, that you can just change your body at will and that's somehow pleasing to God. And so we've gone down. You hear the phrase slippery slope. We have fallen head first down the slippery slope, and the things that they're teaching people these days with regards to, well, if you just don't feel like you were born in the right body, well, that's a sign to you that what they're not saying is that God made a mistake. That's what they're saying. That's what we're teaching people. Well, Esther, in a strange way, is a proof text against this terrible ideology that's going on today. And so we have Mordecai. He's raised Esther again. She's described as incredibly beautiful. Now, the decree for the Jews to be able to return had already been given by the time that our story takes place, the first decree at least. And by the time this story takes place, many Jews had already returned to the land. Mordecai had not. We talked about this in the introduction a couple weeks ago. There's several reasons why a person might have chosen not to return. For some of them, maybe just their age. They didn't want to make the lengthy trip. They've spent most of their life in this particular land. They know more about the language and the customs of Persia than they know about the language and the customs of Israel. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it would be an excuse. We don't know why Mordecai and Esther had not returned, but we know that they haven't. And God has Mordecai where he wants him. Now, what's important to say here, again, we don't want to say more than the scripture says. Mordecai maybe had a good moral reason to have not returned to Israel. Mordecai may have had a sinful reason not to return to Israel. But the reason why he didn't return is irrelevant to God's ability to use him in a very crucial and critical position, again, to bring about his will for the nation of Persia and for the protection and deliverance of the entire people of or the Hebrews who were in Persia at this particular time. And so God, as we have seen consistently, God can and does use good, positive, moral decisions by people to bring about his will. He can use people's sinful decisions to bring about his will. He is not handicapped by what we choose to do. And so again, I can't say one way or another. I don't know why he was still there. The text just says that he was. And so let's move on. And so this contest, you could say, is going on. Esther, again, fair and beautiful, just incredibly beautiful woman. And so when the king's decree goes out, it's no surprise to us that the text says Esther was brought also into the king's house to the custody of Haggai. Now, there's a little bit of debate on this. In my opinion, the way I take this, I don't think Esther chose this. I don't think she willingly entered this. I don't think Mordecai gave her to this. I don't think he forced her to do it. I don't think she chose to do it. I think, again, Mordecai is in the palace. The people have seen her, right? People have seen the daughter, as they would know her, of Mordecai. They've seen how beautiful she was. I think it's very likely that the second this proclamation went out, Esther was probably the first on a lot of people's minds. We got to get her, right? She's got to be one of the ladies that go to the king. I don't think she chose this. And I think that's important later on. But here, for our purposes, God is providentially bringing all these things to pass. Right? Again, what did he providentially created Esther with this beauty. We'll see in a minute that literally every person who sees her is drawn to her. We'll see that here in a moment. And so God providentially created her this way. God providentially has Mordecai still in Persia. God providentially has Ahasuerus put away Vashti. Well, now there's this vacancy that he wants filled. He providentially has these counselors come up with this, insane plan. Well, let's have a beauty contest. Well, all of these things are taking place exactly how God wants them to take place. And we don't even know what the issue is yet in the book of Esther. This is the interesting thing. And again, I'll come back to this later on. But if you're the reader, you still don't know why any of this even really matters. If this is the first time you've ever read through the book, you don't know what the story of Esther is. By this time, you don't even know why any of this is significant. And so again, God is just bringing everything together one step at a time. And so there's some correlation here. Like Daniel, if you remember, not that long ago, we went through the book of Daniel. Like Daniel found favor with just about every person who was ever a superior of Daniel, whether that be the king or somebody else. He found favor everywhere he went. There's a similar situation here with Esther. We are told that she obtained kindness. She obtained kindness from Haggai. Now, that doesn't necessarily, again, I don't want to say what the Bible doesn't say because we're not told why. With Daniel, there were a lot of clues. With Esther, we're not told why. We're not told that she was just, so pure that everybody was drawn to her. We're not told anything. It very well could be literally that she was just so beautiful that everybody was just kind of naturally drawn to her. We don't know why. The text just says that she obtained kindness. And so because of this kindness, that she got everything she needed quickly. Whatever it is she needed, whatever it is she asked for, we'll see in a moment, there was a year-long kind of preparation period before they were actually shown to the king. She was able to receive whatever she wanted, whatever she needed that she thinks would help her, draw the eye of the king. And here's something that, as I started studying this week, I was, to be honest with you, a little surprised. Unlike Daniel, we don't see that she ever refused the king's meat. Now, here's what I mean by that. We're specifically told with Daniel was placed in an impossible situation. And in spite of that, what did he do? He remained faithful. I'll give you another example. Joseph. Joseph is thrown into an impossible situation. And what did he do? He remained faithful. We're not told that with Esther. And so Esther, again, thrown into an impossible situation, right? Again, I don't think she chose this. However, there is no indication in the text anywhere that Esther remained faithful. There is no indication that Esther lived out the law as did Daniel or as did Joseph. In fact, we are told very specifically that Mordecai tells her, don't let anybody know. Don't let anybody know you're a Jew. Now think about this. For a year, she lived in a group of women getting everything she could need, everything she could ask for. If she was able to live in that situation for an entire year and a person never finds out that she was a Jew, she was not following the law. She just wasn't. This would be impossible. And like I said, this is what was surprising me as I really started to get into the details of this. Because Esther is so often uplifted as a hero of feminine virtue. After doing the study this week, I don't think I could ever recommend Esther as a hero of feminine virtue anymore. Now, she is an example of courageousness. We'll see that. I think there's wisdom. I think there's great wisdom that we'll see exemplified with Esther. But it does not seem as though she was faithful to the law. And it does seem, for every indication, as we'll see here in just a moment, when it was her time for her night with the king, we get no indication that she refused. Again, I'm not going to go farther than what the text goes, but I think you understand what I'm saying. And so, again, I think it would be unwise for Christians to uplift Esther as if she is some kind of biblical hero when it comes to morality. I don't think that we see that with her. Again, there are other aspects of her life, other aspects of her character wherein she does become a great example. I don't think this is one of them. And so, if Esther and Mordecai, for that matter, were both able to live amongst the Persians without them knowing about their Jewish faith, they were not following the law. And so then, she becomes another in a long line of imperfect people whom God used to bring about his will. You think of somebody like Samson. Samson was not a moral person. Samson was immoral. I don't want to say most of the time. A lot of the stories that we have about Samson involve him being involved with some kind of immorality. And yet, what did God do? He used Samson. In fact, he brought up Samson to deliver the people, as he's going to bring up Esther to deliver the people. Right? And so he, again, as I said earlier, he is not hamstrung by our sinfulness. God is not sitting up in heaven wringing his hands and thinking, what in the world am I going to do now? They're way worse than I thought they were. No, that's not happening. God has taken all this into account. And so she and Mordecai are both examples of God remaining faithful even when his people are not. And 2 Timothy talks about this. This verse, in fact, perfectly kind of describes the situation of Esther. And so for this reason, again, I don't think we need to be, telling people, look to Esther if you're looking for examples of morality. There are examples in Scripture. I don't think Esther is one of them. And like I said, this was a little bit surprising to me. As I really dived into the text this week to kind of come to that conclusion. Then we see, just kind of finally tonight, after a year of preparation, a year of pampering. And then the text kind of breaks it down a little bit for us there in verse 12. There was 6 months where they were, they had oils and everything to make themselves smell great, look great. And then 6 months with sweet odors and other things, the purifying of the women. And so for a year they did this, and there's another reason why they waited a year. This would guarantee that, that at the very least that they were not pregnant, before the situation. And so there are reasons why they waited so long. But after this year, the women were then brought into the king one at a time for one night. So they would come in, they would spend a night with the king, at which point they would just become a part of the king's harem. This is not a desirable position. In fact, just historically speaking, for most of these women, they might not have ever even seen the king again after this. The text specifically tells us the only time that they would come back to the king is if he specifically called for them by name. Right? He would have to call for them, they would come back. And so this was not a desirable position for really any woman. But once it was Esther's turn, she adorned herself, and again, she has the favor of this man Haggai, and the text tells us, he tells her kind of, here's what I think you should wear. And I think this is an example of her wisdom. She does what he says. And why is that wise? This guy knows Ahasuerus a whole lot better than she does. Right? And so she takes his example. She doesn't say, no, I don't think that I'm going to do what I want to do. No, she takes his advice, and it works, obviously. Now, the text tells us here, because of her beauty, it says that she obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. Everybody who saw her could not deny her beauty. They were drawn to her almost. And this included the king. As she comes in, she spends her night with the king. It says that he loved Esther above all the women. And she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And so the queen now, or the king rather, is overjoyed now. He has a new queen, and for everything that we can understand here in the text, a queen who is far superior in her beauty to what even Vashti was, and we have every reason to believe that Vashti was an incredibly beautiful woman. But now he's overjoyed. He makes a great feast. Here's another feast. As I said last time, the book of Esther has a lot of feasts. And here's another one of these feasts. He makes a great feast to the princes and the servants. To the rest of the kingdom, he sends out the proclamation, hey, I've got my new queen, this woman Esther, and he sends out gifts to all the people. And so there's a lot of rejoicing happening now. But as I said earlier, if you're the first-time reader, you don't know the story of Esther, you've never heard it before, you're reading through this, you don't really know why any of this really matters. Now there's a Jew who has just become queen. That's interesting, but nobody even knows she's a Jew. Right? And so it's not like she's become an example for Jewish people. Right? They might not even know who she is. And so why is this so significant? And so the author of Esther is building the intrigue. This is why I said early on, it's like the soap opera of the Bible. The author of Esther is building the intrigue one step at a time. But every step of the way is showing us, he doesn't tell us, but is showing us the hand of God. Right? And this is, as we said in introduction, why so many people, really dislike the book of Esther, because he's never mentioned. But as I said then, you would have to be blind to not see God in the book of Esther. Right? These are not just a litany of random coincidences that just happen to come together and just happen to lead to the deliverance of the Jewish people in Persia. Oh, you'd have to have a faith in coincidence instead of a faith in God to believe that kind of a thing. And so here he's laying down the path that's going to